Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar, where we get to sit down and talk with interesting professional guitar players and related music industry experts. If you love playing guitar, stick around. You're in the right place. Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber from Everyone Loves Guitar, and today I've got an excellent guitar player to chat with, and he's a hell of a nice guy. We're talking to John Shaw. He's originally from Florence, Alabama, and he's been living in and working in Nashville for a decade. He's had the pleasure of performing live and recording with some of Nashville's most established acts and producers. And he's currently the lead guitarist, actually, for multi-platinum country artist Josh Turner. And John was kind enough to sit and chat with us. He's in a hotel up in Saginaw, Michigan. So, John, I appreciate that, man. Thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey, do you do session work as well?
I do, actually, quite a bit. And I really enjoy it, which it's sometimes it's tough to juggle the road thing and the session thing, but fortunately for us, Josh's schedule is pretty friendly to that. So we're not gone enough that I have to say no to a lot of stuff. I've been on gigs in the past where I have. But I really enjoy getting to create, and fortunately it seems to work out schedule-wise that I get to do that quite a bit, so that's nice.
That's awesome. How many days a year are you on the road with Josh?
So it generally ends up being about 60 or 70 shows, which is just a few more days than that. So obviously we as sidemen aren't really in control of that, but they generally have kind of a target, and it ends up being around that number, which means, like today is a day off for us on the road. So every now and then, because of routing and travel, you'll have one of those. So when I say 60, 70 shows, that ends up being about 80 days a year, which is less than a quarter of the year if you think about it. You've got
really reasonable. You've
got quite a bit of time at home at that point. So
even if it's 100 days, you still have 250 days, basically.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
And it's so funny because when you talk to people that are outside the music business and you say, oh, we do 70 shows a year, they say, oh my gosh, like that seems like a big number. But, if you talk to people in the business that have toured at all, you say, 70 shows, and they're like, man, that sounds easy. Let's sign me up, because, I've been with bands that did, 150 or 200 dates. And
wow.
I went and subbed with an act a couple of years ago, and she was it's a girl named Ashley Monroe. She's fantastic. She's on Warner Brothers. She's a singer-songwriter. And she was in the middle of what's called a radio tour. Mm-hmm. Which is you go play acoustic shows for a bunch of radio stations and kind of try to warm them up to your music. But she was also doing her regular dates in addition. So in the 35 days that I went and subbed with her, because Josh was taking a break to finish his record, in 35 days, I think we did 32 shows.
Wow, that's
which was a little bit insane, and. But try scheduling that out over a year's time,
Yeah.
Acts that I've been with that have been, newer, trying to break into the scene, still doing a lot of club dates, maybe doing some support for some bigger acts, and then also doing radio shows. I had a year with a girl named Kristen Kelly that was on Sony where I think we did, we were pushing 160 shows.
Crap, that's work.
Which is 160 shows is, add 10%. That's almost 200 days on the road. And it's definitely not. And at that point, you can't do sessions and you can't do in-town gigs, and you kind of fall off the map. So it's definitely nice to be with an artist like Josh that has a completely sane schedule. He's a family man. So he tries to get home, and a lot of the guys out here, have families. So, me not having a family means I use that time to work. I use that time to work in town and try to build the session side and the production side and all that. So,
you look at a guy like a Warren Haynes, and I don't know how that guy, I mean, he's on the road probably 300 days a year.
Right. And you know what? It's funny because the rock scene is like that in a lot of ways, especially that jam scene. Mm-hmm. And I'm a huge Warren Haynes fan, actually. I think his songwriting, his singing, and his playing are all brilliant. But guys like that, you look at those guys, but you know what? They've got careers that don't require having, and Warren's a little bit of an exception in a different way, but like, he doesn't have to have any irons in any particular fire as far as like being at home and like, keeping accounts. That's the thing, is like with being a sideman, it's like you're trying to always keep, you've got your main thing, your road thing or whatever, but then you're also trying to keep like all your in-town accounts happy and going. As far as just not falling off the face of the earth, when they need you to do something.
Sorry, go ahead. I apologize.
I was like, a guy like Warren is great because like his career is like completely his, right? So like if he wants to go out to Government Mule for, 60 shows a year, and then, there's an Allman Brothers thing and then a Dead thing and like whatever, he and his management are in control a little more of his schedule. Because he's the artist, kind of, you know what I mean?
Oh, totally. And, I've seen Mule 4 or 5 times, and I've seen him play with the Allman Brothers up at the Beacon Theater. And this guy, I mean, you talk about a guy giving 120%, and then after the show, he hangs out, and there's a line of 250 people, and he'll say hello, smile, and take a picture and autograph.
Oh, I know it, man. He's the nicest guy in the world. I've gotten to meet him a few times, and he's a good cat.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Hey, so what are you working on now that you're most excited about, whether it's studio or?
Oh my gosh, that's such a tough question because, well, so the interesting thing about like what we do is, I was actually just talking to one of my best buddies about this, is that you're constantly, if you're doing it right, or not that my approach is necessarily the only one, but like, if you're doing it the way I think is right, you're constantly, working on different stuff and just keeping yourself diverse, right? So like when I am the happiest is when I'm happy with my road situation, and also, I'm getting plenty of studio work and a little bit of production work and kind of keeping a diverse palette. And I've got a couple of in-town residencies that kind of are an outlet as well. So in that case, if you've got a good mix going, I think whatever you're most excited about is the thing that you worked on most recently.
I get that. I totally get that.
And so, obviously I have a great time out here with Josh, and we're putting some killer shows together. His record came out this spring, which is exciting. I've been with him 4 years, and it's the first time he's had a new record out in the time I've been with him. So that's cool. But the most recent thing I worked on in town is I'm producing a Texas country artist named Will Southern, and he's great. I've played on his records before, but it's my first time producing him. And it's one of those things where like all the planets align. The songs are great. The musicians that we ended up using were fantastic. And Will can sing the phone book, right? So it was just one of those things that we're just starting. I think the reason I'm most excited about it right now is that I'm just getting mixes back, and we're kind of in the mix critique process, because when I produce, I try to be completely hands-on all the way through the editing process, and then give it to a mixer that I know is amazing, because that's not a skill set that I really have developed. So one of my excuse me, one of my best buddies, and actually he's also a producer and a great one, and probably the first guy to take the chance on hiring me as a young guitar player on some sessions in Nashville, at least professional sessions, is a guy named Jay Hall, and he kind of came up a little bit in the Kansas City rock scene, and then moved to town a few years ago. Kind of rose up in the Nashville rock scene. But he's a fantastic producer, and we work together in that capacity, with him producing and me playing guitar pretty frequently. But if it's in the budget for him to mix a project I produced, I absolutely try to make that happen, because he is a wizard at making good sounds better. So I'm in the process of getting mixes back from him of this project I just produced. So that's what I'm listening to, in my off time. So that's what I'm so stoked about right now, is because it's fresh, and it's good. So
did he influence you, and was he kind of a mentor to you as far as production?
To a certain extent, his style and the kind of music that he produces is a little bit different than what I do, because I'll dabble in like the Southern rock and rock thing. And actually, we met. I was playing with a band called the Delta Saints, and we met then because the Saints made their second EP with Jay as a producer. And it was one of those things where we just developed this instant rapport. Like, it was just you sometimes being a professional musician, there's kind of a couple of different levels on which you communicate with folks. And sometimes it's fighting with them, and sometimes it's all business. You're able to get the job done, and it's fine. The outcome is what it needed to be, but you were both just being professional. And then sometimes, I'd say about 30% of the time or less, you run into the guy that is just absolutely on the same page with you, and you communicate great, and you work quickly, which is important, especially in Nashville, to work extremely fast. Yeah. You just have a rapport, and Jay and I were like that even when I was in a band, hiring him. So it's funny because we've kind of made this evolution as friends and as coworkers, because when I started working with Jay, I was in a band that was hiring him as a producer. We were paying him money. Okay. We called him and said, "We want you to produce our record," and he said yes. And I went through the whole process with him as a client of his. And then we got, when we realized we had chemistry, then he started hiring me as a guitar player on other people's records. Okay. So we kept developing that chemistry, and then like now he still does that, but like I'll also hire him maybe to engineer a record I'm producing, or to mix a record that I've already finished, And so it's like sometimes relationships evolve like that, but the entire time, yeah, I've definitely learned a lot about how to communicate. Every producer, as far as learning how to produce, if you're doing it right, as a musician that wants to get into production, if you're doing it right, you've got your ears open and, your mental notebook out anytime you work with another producer, because you're just trying to figure out how they're doing it and what works for them and what about it's just like listening to a musician, Sure. It's like when I will go to, a show of a guitar player that I really respect, or it doesn't have to be a guitar player, any musician I really respect, you'll sit there and you'll kind of like mentally take notes about, how they play and how they do what they do. And so Jay was one of the people that had the good fortune to work with a ton, so I definitely have a lot more notes from him than I may have from some other guys. But at some point, it just becomes, just this mental playbook of, stuff you've not necessarily stolen, but you just, co-opted from guys that you respect, and that they work in a great, efficient manner and get good results. So.
Yeah, and I think my experience anyway is one of the best ways to tell the true character of someone is when you put money in between you, whether it's whether you're paying them or they're paying you. I think that's when you get to see, not the dark side, but you get to see really how people are in their true character.
Sure.
If you're paying them, do they deliver? Do they have integrity? Do they have pride of ownership? Do they give 110%? Do they respect? A lot of times you'll pay money for services and then they're just moving on to the next one. The excitement dies after the check is cut.
Right.
And similarly, if they're paying you, are they realistic in their demands and expectations? Are they fair? Are they paying you a fair wage? I've always found that that's a good way to determine character, actually.
Sure.
So you had that experience.
And Nashville is one of those places where it's such a small town. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not anymore. It was when I moved there, kind of. I got to Nashville in 2006, and the population, I think I figured out last year that in the time that I've been in Nashville, the equivalent of the entire population of Lincoln, Nebraska has moved to Nashville.
Man,
so
I was there with my wife like last October, about a year ago, September, October. It was like Orlando, man. They're building, and like every available lot is apartment complex. It's
outrageous, man. And so it was physically a small town when I moved there, mm-hmm. But it's still, industry wise, it's a small town because, if the group of people that actually I won't say get to do, but stuck around, and because a lot of it's perseverance. And the group of people, the fraternity of people that are working in the music business proper is a tight knit group, and it's everywhere from creative directors at publishing companies to heads of record labels to artist managers to studio owners to producers and everything. I know people just from being in town for 11 years and just hanging out and all of that. I know people in all of those jobs. So it gets around if you don't treat somebody correctly or you don't do a good job or whatever. So there's motivation other than financial to be your best self.
Yeah, for sure.
Not just professionally, but also personally. Because there's the flip side is there's a million dudes that can play guitar proficiently. Mm-hmm. So that's not necessarily what it's all about. It's about playing guitar well, but also being a good dude, being honest, and being easy to work with. Because, one of the big things I look at, and I don't want to say it. It didn't take this perspective to know that this was a thing, but it definitely enhanced this side. When I'm looking, say I'm producing a session versus playing on it, and I'm looking to hire some guys, the big factor for me is coachability, because a lot of guys can play, but can you play what needs to be played or what I want played or what the producer or the artist or the session leader has in mind? Because, just being super proficient at your instrument is it's only one part of the of the skill set. So,
well, especially as you said, in a town like Nashville, where there's, I think I interviewed Walter Carter from Carter Vintage, and he made a comment. He goes, "Craig, the stupidest thing anybody could do is be a guitar player and come to Nashville."
It's not wrong.
Yeah, for that reason, what you just said.
I'm glad I did it when I was 18 years old, because I don't think I would. I think I had just enough, youthful bravado at that point to believe, my own press to a certain extent.
I hear you.
I think at this point, maturity wise, I would be like, no, I don't think that's a good idea at all. But at this point, I've already worked through the tough part, the toughest part, anyway. So,
well, let's talk about that. What prompted you to move to Nashville?
Oh man, so I loved Nashville from when I was a kid, way before I was a musician, because I had an aunt that lived in Franklin, which is just south of town, and I grew up in Florence, Alabama, which is like the Muscle Shoals kind of area. So we weren't that far from Nashville physically. We, you can be from Florence to like where my aunt lived in Franklin in about 2 hours flat. So now, in a lot of ways, and Florence is pretty far removed from society at large. It's this little kind of hermit town because there's not an interstate that runs anywhere near there.
Okay.
And it's grown up a little bit since I left, but when I was living there as a kid, there was no major shopping. The restaurants were pretty basic and everything. So if you wanted to go to a city, if you wanted to experience that, you went to Nashville because it was literally the closest thing that resembled, a major city.
Okay.
And it just so happened that we had family there. So I was in love with Nashville from the get-go. But then when it came time to start talking about college, I had my sights on Nashville anyway. And then I had no idea, Craig, what I wanted to do for a living. I mean, no clue, man.
Oh, so when did you start playing guitar?
I was 15 years old when I started playing.
Okay.
So,
but it wasn't like back then. You which is late comparatively to a lot of guys.
Right. I wish I'd started at like 9.
Right.
Like I have a lot of regret about that. Not that I had like the consciousness to choose that. It just kind of fell into my lap through a school music program. But I'm in my senior year of high school, and I'm like, I really like playing guitar, but there were some mixed emotions as far as people in my life encouraging me or discouraging me from that as a living. Mm-hmm. My parents were super supportive. My grandparents were super skeptical of, and I was really close with them. So they were super skeptical because, they come from that generation where, you have to be Elvis to make money playing music, right?
Sure.
And so I kind of got some mixed signals from family, and then fortunately, I had my high school music program was pretty awesome, and I had a couple of teachers my senior year of high school that made a huge difference in kind of tipping me towards trying it, and especially this guy Bill Hill. He was my jazz band teacher. He was the band teacher, but obviously playing guitar, I wasn't going to march. So he kind of tipped me towards the music thing, but I wasn't 100% sure. So I started to seek out schools that had music related majors that maybe weren't music performance. And in this process, I actually picked up a copy of Vintage Guitar Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the current issue, which, when I was a kid, I was so down the rabbit hole with all that stuff, and I would just grab these magazines and nerd out on gear, the stuff I couldn't afford.
And that's changed a lot, I bet, right? I'm being sarcastic.
It's evolved into something I think a little more productive, but we'll get to that in a minute for sure, because I do like to talk about gear. So anyway, I pick up this magazine and it's got Brad Paisley on it, and even if I didn't buy every issue, which I did, I would have bought that one because I was into Paisley pretty heavily. Because to me, he represented, probably at the time, this would have been 2005. So this was like, he was the essence of what a guitar hero in popular music was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because, my body of listening, I can really thank my uncle. And we can talk about him as much as you want, because he was a huge tipping point as far as like getting me listening to the right stuff and getting me educated on how to get sounds and tones and everything.
He was a guitar player?
He is a guitar player, yeah.
Oh,
but he not professionally. No, he's actually a tech. He does guitar tech work for, not on the road or anything, but for like setups and stuff for music stores in the area, and also out of his house.
Very cool.
So that's his gig, but he's great at it. So he got me listening to a diverse body of stuff. But in the house, that's where like me listening to, the Allman Brothers stuff and all that that's all, my uncle's influence. At the house, country music was king because my dad loves it.
Okay.
And, there's this like famous story because my mom's like the quintessential city girl.
Where
and she's from Chattanooga.
Okay.
And there's this like really like, there's a story they like to tell about when they were dating about, my dad playing my mom Flat and Scruggs on like their first or second date, and like that, like, I can't even believe they stayed together after that. Like, cause like she, bluegrass is not even on her radar, but anyway, so like, I remember the first time I heard Paisley, I walked down and I'm getting way off the how did I come to Nashville thing, but, I walked down the stairs one Saturday morning and Dad's got CMT on and it's the I'm Gonna Miss Her video. And it's right when he's ripping that solo and he's obviously playing, a Telecaster G-Bender solo on the television. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world because at the time you didn't hear a lot of great country guitar. That had kind of fallen by the wayside as far as the artists playing it.
Yeah.
So I fell in love with that, and back to this Vintage Guitar Magazine article with Brad on it. I'm sitting there flipping through, reading, about his gear and everything, and they start talking about Belmont University, which even in my research, I had not heard of Belmont. And but what they specifically started talking about is this, music production program that they have, and the fact that, Brad basically had unlimited access to studio facilities when he was there.
Right.
And that just sounded like the coolest thing in the world to me.
The unlimited access to studio stuff.
Right. To just be able to go in and learn and grow in that way, could care less what I learned in a classroom. I was already to that point of like, for some reason I was already cognizant of the fact that past a certain point, And I took every semester I was at Belmont, I took lessons in the guitar program. And I always was trying to get better in that regard. And I'm a practicing fool anyway. But at some point, I knew that like what I learned in the classroom was only going to be partially applicable once I got into the real world if I wanted to really do this. But there was just something that just beamed.
Let me ask you a question about that. That's good intuition. How did you what was your thought? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? Because usually when you're a kid sitting there, that's not a natural thought. What was your, were you influenced to get to think like that, or where did that come from?
I think it had a lot to do with, because, I was gigging as a kid. The first paid gigs I did were at this like blues bar in Northeast Pennsylvania where we were living at the time. And, and then my junior and senior year of high school, we moved to Wisconsin, and I had like a jazz trio that would go out and gig. And
wait a minute, you moved to Wisconsin from Florence?
No, I actually moved to Wisconsin from Pennsylvania. I moved from Pennsylvania to Pennsylvania from Florence, and this was all in my high school years, right?
Oh wow!
So
what was like? Dad got transferred or something, or
yeah, that kind of thing. But so I was gigging a lot, and a lot of it was, because I was the young kid, a lot of it was like a guy that was like this local blues artist would have like this fascination with the fact that there was a 16-year-old white kid that liked to play, Dwayne Allman licks, or or the fact that because I was already into the chicken picking thing too, and I had the market cornered on that in Wisconsin in 2005.
I don't know where in Wisconsin, but there are that's a pretty good musical.
Sure.
Minnesota and Wisconsin are pretty good musical incubators in certain
there's a
towns.
There's a lot of live music, So anyway, I guess to answer your question, I was just around enough guys that did it professionally already that I kind of got the vibe that a lot of what, and I just did so much research, I'm a bookworm, and I was just a sponge for knowledge about what I wanted to do, which, for better or worse, I didn't have much of a social life, but I did get to know how the process worked, and it just seemed like all the guys that really did it, even if they did have an education in it, there was a lot of hard knocks. That you had to go through that process regardless.
Sure.
And so when I read that article about Brad being at Belmont and learning all, getting all that studio time and everything, I was just like, well, that's it. If it's not Belmont, it's a program like that where I have, plenty of time to get to know how to do this in a real world kind of way. And in a way that I can, what I tell people about Belmont all the time, because anything from, a lot of people ask the question, are you glad you went to Belmont?
Right.
Because it's expensive. It's gotten more expensive. It's gotten considerably more expensive since I was there. So I don't know now. At some point, anything is like is an investment, and is it worth the investment? And I don't know about that with what it costs today. I was fortunate to get quite a bit of scholarship help and a little bit of help from the folks as well. So, but it's expensive, and people ask that in retrospect, but people also ask that, every now and then we'll have a young opener out with Josh or something, and they'll be 18 years old and trying to decide on a school, and, or if they want to go to school at all. And if they find out that that's where I went, it has a reputation now, and they'll ask if I was happy. And I'll always say this: Belmont was a super safe place to make a lot of mistakes. And it really helped me in that way, because, man, me and one of my buddies, a guy named Alan Brown, who was a recording engineer, and he's a live sound guy now. But he and I kind of set off on this quest to just get as much studio time as we possibly could. and the other thing is, even if I wasn't running the project, or have anything to do with the putting together of the project, if somebody would ask me to play on something at Belmont, I'd just say yes. And I don't care if it was, at the time, of course, I'm a kid. We're all kids. We're all learning how to do it. It's all basically a lab project, right? Sure. The way the program's structured, everybody has to do, you're forced to do like 3 projects a semester. But like above and beyond that, you have, the opportunity to book more time.
I can't believe why anybody wouldn't be in there like night and day, to tell you the truth.
Right. So between me and Alan just booking as much time in as many studios as we possibly could, because when I was there, Belmont had, they had 3 studios. They had a studio in the basement of the music business building. They had kind of a lease agreement with RCA Studio B, which is a historic studio in town where a lot of the Nashville sound stuff was recorded back in the 50s and 60s. And then they had a lease agreement with Ocean Way Nashville, which is right there on Music Row.
They're one of the best studios out there, aren't they?
Yeah, it's one of the best facilities in Nashville. So the thing was, the basement studio, and it was great. It was a good facility. That facility was always available. And then you could book RCAB at night when the tours were, because they do tours with the Country Music Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. So after tours are over at 6, you could book a 6 to 9 or a 10 to 1 session there. And then you could do Ocean Way. You could book it any time that they didn't have a client. But then if they got an actual client, they would kick you off, which was fine. I mean, I totally understand that.
Yeah, man.
But it's like anytime they had downtime, you could book it. You could book this amazing facility, as a kid for free, which is just insane when you think about it. So, man, between me and Alan booking a lot of time and like the bands I was in, and then just literally saying, it doesn't matter what at the time, it didn't matter what somebody was paying me or if they were paying me. I just wanted the seat time.
Sure.
So, and I, like I said, I'm a kid in college. I'm not in the union. I'm not out in the professional scene, and I'm playing on a recording for another kid that's in college that's probably not going to see the light of day anyway, right?
Yeah.
We're all just learning. But man, I kept log of it, and I got something like 2,200 hours.
That's awesome.
In my 4 years at Belmont in the studio, and a lot of it was just making mistakes, man. It was just showing up with the wrong gear, or not knowing how to work quickly enough, or because there would be times where, like, especially in my freshman year, where we would book a studio to finish somebody's project, and you on a 3-hour session, and we wouldn't get done because nobody knew what they were doing, and either musician wise or behind the desk, and And that was fine because we were 18 years old and we were in this safe space of like, you know, if I screw this up, the only people that are going to know or hear that are also 18 years old and learning, you know, versus getting thrown to the wolves on a pro session for the first time and screwing it up and ending on a blacklist somewhere, you know. So it was just super safe, man. It was, and you know, as I got more time in that seat, I just learned about, you know, you learn the language and, because you are in a classroom as well at the same time, and you're learning, you know, you're learning the nomenclature and you're learning how gear works and all this stuff. And so I'm sitting there just absorbing all I can. And then the other thing is I was fortunate enough to observe, you know, some of the guys at the time. You know, I was fortunate enough to, you know, if a professor likes you or something, and fortunately, a lot of the professors at Belmont are active in the industry. They're still making projects and they're still playing on records and like whatever. So if a music department professor took a liking to you or a recording department professor took a liking to you, they might let you come observe a session, you know, that they were working on in town. And
like a professional session. Right.
And so it was just like, okay, well, I saw, you know, as a 20-year-old, you know, I might be in the back of a control room, you know, keeping my head down, but listening to the way, you know, Tom Bukovac plays on a record and like how he works and how quick, you know, how the thing that blew me away the first time that I observed one was just the speed of the game, right? It's like the NFL, you know. So you would go do that, and then I would go take that back to the piddly sessions I was working on, you know, with my peers at school. And then so by the time I got to my senior year, all of a sudden I realized that I've got at least some similar, you know, I'm ahead of the curve in the fact that like I'm still going to be wet behind the ears if I ever get hired on a real deal session, but I am ahead of the curve in that I'm not going to make all of the rookie mistakes, right?
Well, here you are. Hang on a second, man. Here you are, what, 5-6 years out of school maybe, and you're touring with a major act. You've got studio time booked, and you're doing production. And I've spoken to people at all different levels, and that's definitely ahead of the curve.
Right. So I really lay a lot of that at Belmont's door just for giving me a place to figure out what not to do.
Sure.
And I'll say that it gave me that same perspective about a lot of live performance things too, because in addition to doing all these sessions that I could, I also played on every recital that I could, and I took gigs wherever I could, you know, in town, both with Belmont people and not with Belmont people. But because live was a little bit safer, like, you know, I kind of knew how to play live. I didn't necessarily know how to play with like an artist gig, which playing on people's recitals was great for that because, you know, a lot of people at Belmont that are in the top tier of vocalists or whatever, they end up with record deals and they're running their operation like a professional artist before they graduate. So it was good to play with folks like that live too, because like, you know, I'm as a 20-year-old kid, I didn't really know that the goal was ever to like nail a part from a record. And I know that might sound weird, but like it doesn't make sense as, you know, it didn't make sense to me as a kid who grew up listening to a lot of improvisational music that you would necessarily
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
copper record note for note.
Yeah, you grew up listening to the Allman Brothers, and you're like, wait a minute, Dickie doesn't do that.
Right.
Dwayne didn't do that. Warren Haynes doesn't.
Even like the specific brand of country that I really liked to listen to, like I love Vince Gill and I love Brad Paisley, and if you go to see those shows, it's not the record. Yeah. It's a lot of guitar playing, and stretching out. And so, like, another thing I learned at Belmont was how to play live with people and give them what they want and backseat your ego. Your name's not on the marquee. Your name's not on. And at Belmont, it was your name's not on the recital program. It's right. Like, but out here, it's your name's not on the marquee, and artists. Every artist has varying degrees of, like I would never hear that sentence from Josh, but there are artists that I might hear that sentence from, like sure. Your name's not on the marquee or whatever. But it's always the tacit expectation that if you're getting paid to give somebody something, whether it's in the studio or live, you give them what they want, and whether that's live and it's playing something note for note perfect, or it's in the studio and it's being coachable, you're getting paid for a task, and that task is to deliver a product, which it could be a record if you're producing, or it could be a guitar part if you're playing on a record, or it could be a guitar part if you're playing live. And the expectation is that you deliver because you're getting paid to do it. And it's just like somebody going to the store and buying a bag of Fritos. Like, they expect a full bag of corn chips when they pay $1.99, and when somebody goes, when I go in, I've been fortunate lately to get some better and better session work in town, and have found myself working with guys that I never thought I'd get to work with, and on stuff that is higher profile than I ever thought I'd get to play on. And I'm just on the cusp of that now. But if you show up there, the expectation is, like, I hired you to play acoustic guitar. I want an acoustic guitar part that I can use, right?
Sure.
Quickly. Yeah. We don't want to be here all day, trying to find it. It's got to be, first or second take, or, and it's got to be something that's usable. It's, I know enough about having edited stuff that wasn't so great that, that's really frustrating as a producer or an engineer, to have to go back and either replace something or edit it to the hilt to make it usable. And so, like, what they're paying for when they hire a studio musician, and what Josh or anybody else that hires me live is paying for is a result that's as tangible and definable as buying the bag of corn chips at the gas station. So
hey, let me ask you this, John, because I want to talk about gear in a second, but before we do that,
sure.
This journey you've been on, it's been super productive for you, and it sounds like that old expression, luck is where hard work meets preparation. I think that's probably extremely true in this case. But what have you learned about yourself through doing this? What is this journey like? What's the one or two takeaways growth-wise that you've learned about you?
Let's see. That's a tough one. You kind of learn where your strengths are as a musician, especially, because, there's I thought that the thing that I would have the most difficulty with, coming up, and when I first kind of learned the score on all the different, applications of musical skill, I thought I would have a lot of trouble with the live side, personally. And when I learned that the expectation in a lot of ways is to play something, that's the expectation with Josh, and it's the expectation on a lot of high profile gigs, is to nail the record. And that's its own skill set. It's like a sport. It's like you either hit your marks or you don't. It's like, playing a live gig with an artist that expects to hear the record every night is like, skiing the downhill slalom and making every gate,
Yeah.
Whereas, being on a gig where that's not the expectation, like when I was subbing with Ashley Monroe, that's not the expectation with her. She kind of wants to stretch out and be, a little more creative with what happens at the gig, and doesn't really care about the record past a certain point. Mm-hmm. Obviously you can't go up there and play a completely different song or whatever, or something unrecognizable part wise, but embellishment's encouraged, and that deal. And that's more like, it's more of a routine versus a hitting your marks kind of thing. And then, being in a studio is completely different, because a lot of times there's no map. There's no expectation of play these notes. You're on your own. You're creating, and it's a completely different skill set to create quickly than it is to replicate something that somebody else has created.
And so what has that taught you about yourself in this picture?
Well, so what I was saying is, I always knew that I could create. I didn't know that I would necessarily be that guy that could nail a part every night, and that would get really pumped about, because you got to be excited about this stuff at all junctures, because if for a second that you lose that, and you do lose it for a second, but if you lose that on any sort of semi-permanent basis, you're in trouble, because you can start to get bitter or cynical or fall out of love with it. So I never thought I could be the guy that could really fall in love with nailing a tone and a part that somebody else came up with. But I do. It's a point of pride to me now because I pull a board tape from Josh's show almost every night, and we get them. We all have the option to listen to them, and unless we're told to listen to one, which means you're in some degree of trouble. I don't have any idea if the other guys do or not. I think I know a lot of them do. But I have become this guy that gets really pumped about nailing a tone and a part. And if Josh has a new tune out, man, I'm stoked to try to recreate that live, And I never really thought that would. That surprised me about myself, that I got so into that side of it.
Well, let me tell you some good news about that. I interviewed Jerry McPherson, who I'm sure you know, or know who he is. And he told me that when he had to go on tour with Vince Gill, he had to learn every single note that Dan Huff had played. The same exact situation you're talking. And he said when he came back from that tour, he was because of that tuition and that learning he had to do, he said he was so prepared in the studio. He said it was like I went out.
Right.
Yeah, he said I went out with a quiver that was half full, and then when I came back from that tour, that quiver had so many arrows in it, I didn't even know which one to pull first, but I had all those arrows available for me in the studio.
Well, and you know what's so wild about that is that's the truth. It's that you can get, like, you know, the guys that play on Josh's records, JT Cornfloss played a lot of the parts. And, you know, the most recent record was produced by Kenny Greenberg, so he played almost all the electric guitar. Oh yeah, man. And then on the acoustic side, you know, he's kind of always had Brian Sutton play on his records. So, you know, and my role out here is mostly electric, but there are acoustics, you know, there's acoustic stuff too, because we've got a great utility guy that plays amazing. He's a bluegrasser, and he plays amazing acoustic guitar and also banjo. There might be something that has an acoustic part and a banjo part, you know. So I'm kind of the same way, man. Like, just from being out with Josh, but also from the other artist gigs I've done. Yeah, you take that stuff and you just absorb it. So it's like, well, I like, perfect example. I never used to play, or I didn't play a ton of acoustic guitar, you know, at least at the Nashville level before I took this gig 4 years ago. It just wasn't, you know, I always loved bluegrass growing up, but like, it's just not something that I forced myself to become good at. Mm-hmm. But when you have to learn a ton of Brian Sutton licks and you know, how he you get inside how he plays rhythm guitar and all of that stuff, all of a sudden it becomes part of your skill set, you know? And so now it's funny, like 2/3 of the time when I get hired on a session, it's to play acoustic.
Oh, wow. And so now you basically got an opportunity presented to you because of this.
Right. And it's like, and so that, you know, what you heard from Jerry is completely correct, that like, you know, when you have to wrap your head completely around someone else's style for a little while, it helps you grow a lot. And I do that now when I don't have to do it for a gig. You know, I'll sit there and I'll hear a guitar player I love and I'll study it like I'm about to have to go out and cop his parts live, but I'll, you know, it'll be for no reason. You know, it'll just be because I thought what he did was cool.
Yeah.
And
totally get it.
So that's one thing I've definitely learned about myself. Not that only that I can, you know, completely do that, but also that it's fun. You know, it's really fun to me. It's become really fun to me to wrap my brain around somebody else's, you know, way of approaching the instrument.
Well, it's the pride of ownership, I would imagine, in successfully completing that as well.
Sure, and that's, like I said, that's why I listen to a board tape every night, because it's like you either, you know, when you know what the expectation is, you either hit your marks or you didn't. You know, versus a super improvisation. You know, if you hear an Allman Brothers board tape or a Grateful Dead board tape or whatever, it might be like, well, they either had a really good night or they didn't. Correct. But it's objective, you know, or it's subjective at that point. And you know, this is like the stakes on this kind of gig are you either did it or you didn't, and that's cool. It's cool to have a hardline objective that you hit every night. You know, I think that's good for you as a player too. Because you really get to focus on things like pocket. You know, we play to a click in our ears. We've got a click in our ears when we play the metronome, and you, like, when you know what notes are coming up, you really get to focus on putting them in the right spot. So if you get really good at that, then next time you're in the studio or whatever, and you're creating, but you're also still having to have pocket, you realize that your pocket's gotten 1,000 times better because you've been playing to a metronome every night for 4 years, you know?
Right.
So it's interesting the ways that stuff like that can help you develop. because it's a challenge, man. It's a challenge when you have been playing an instrument for 10 years or more. You know, you're always trying to find stuff to keep it fresh. And you're always trying to find ways to get better in those subtle ways of like, well, you know, my pocket's a little bit better than it was a year ago or whatever, you know.
Yeah, well, you're at a point in time, too, in your technical ability where, you know, it's a sloping curve. You're at the top, so you're going to make little increments. But when you're going from 90 to 91%, it's a lot more. I don't know if I'm at the top yet, but I'm trying. Yeah, but, you know, it's a lot easier to go from 10% to 25% of your max than it is to go from 90 to 91. That leap will come a lot quicker at the bottom numbers.
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's a great analogy.
Hey, this is Craig Garber, and that's the end of part 1 of my interview with John Shaw. In part 2, we spent a ton of time talking about gear. John's a big gearhead. He's got quite a collection of vintage guitars, Telecasters, Les Pauls, Gibsons. I mean, he's custom guitars, everything. So we spent a lot of time talking about guitars and gear next episode, and a pretty long segment on pickups. So if you're into gear, if you like playing guitar and you want to learn something, check it out. We'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this show. If you did, subscribe to the Everyone Loves Guitar podcast, and you can do this online at everyonelovesguitar.com or on iTunes. And if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star positive review. The more 5-star reviews we get, the higher our show ranks, and higher rankings mean we get to continue speaking with cool, interesting guests on our show. We'll see you on the next episode, and until then, keep playing your guitar and have fun making music.